So what do you think of the so this whole headstanding thing, handstanding? I mean, on the one hand, I think it is easier for us to see it as just a part of a larger Weltanschauung, part of a larger way of being, which is sometimes these letters criticize the Chasidim of, not being depressed about their sins, of just being too joyous. And certainly the idea that somehow there's ecstatic prayer going on, I mean, that makes sense. And, or Dr. Brill's idea that this is just, some sort of the exception to the rule. There's some kids who are doing handstands. But if that's all it is, I mean, why is that? Why does it come up so much? And why is there such criticism of it? So, I mean, one way to understand it is it's a symbol of the bigger issue, which is that the non-Chasidim do not like kind of the Hasidic worldview, the Hasidic emphasis, the Hasidic sensibility about Judaism, and this represents that.
There's no question. There's no question then that it was going on. Is that? I mean,
it seems to come up a lot. It's in more than one letter, and it, in the top, 5 criticisms that people have of the Chasidim, the reasons for putting them in excommunication are. I mean, it's funny, right? I mean, to us, it doesn't seem like reasons for excommunicating, but the reasons basically that come up over and over again for excommunication are the change in nusach, change in the version of the Siddur. They're using a Sephardic or a mystical version of Siddur, but it's based on the Arizal, who, is 200 years before this, 300 years before this. That's where they're getting their Siddur from. So they've switched Siddurim, they've switched versions of the davening. They don't have the emphasis on Torah study that they should have, but rather on prayer, and they sometimes spend so much time on prayer that they're praying too late in the day. I mean, it's sort of a funny criticism, too much prayer. The handstands. What else has been the criticism? It's really, it's kind of hard to put your finger on what the real criticisms really are. Let's see if we can go back to the one that was signed by the Vilna, which was number 3, I think. And I mean, a lot of the criticism is very general. It's new. This is something they're innovating. But I mean, it's not just like, they should change. It's compared to Avodah Zarah, to idolatry. Here, let me share my screen. I'll just go back to earlier. And this was from, we read this a few weeks ago. This was letter number 4. And this is the one that was signed by the Vilna Gaon. This is probably what we would call the cherem, the excommunication. And, he says, number 1, they're doing something new. Oh, the yelling out during davening in Yiddish. Right, they've changed the davening, the nusach. Now, they didn't create their own nusach. It's not like the reform is going to be later. They've taken on the nusach of the Arizal, of Sephardim. And it's called Nusach Sfard. Even today, it's called Nusach Sfard, even though it's not because it has Sephardic roots, because the Arizal was a Sephardi, but it's obviously it's become Eastern European through the Chasidim. They daven too late. They have this sense that everybody that's with them, afilu am haaretz, even somebody who doesn't know anything, that doesn't read the Shema, when he's connected to this group, they say he acquires his whole world to come in one moment. In other words, they've taken away the work from Judaism. They yell out during the prayers in Yiddish. Migunim. Migunim means disgusting. What they're saying is disgusting. And I don't know what that is. There was this worry maybe that what they're saying is something Sabbatian. And they say that their minds, are actually in the upper worlds. They're spreading out, and they nullify the study of the Torah. They don't study enough Torah. And they don't worry about their sins. They're not pained by their sins. Right? This is what we love about the Chasidim, that the Chasidim are trying to serve God with joy all the time. And then, and that's the things that are listed. Now, in our minds, those are not so bad. It's hard to put yourself in the shoes of somebody in 1772, 100 years after Shabbat Tzvi. Is that what it is? Is it a slippery slope issue? Is it like the Chassam Sofer is going to say, 70 years later, anything new is forbidden? Those are the things that are always listed in the headstands. But then there's kind of this other thing that happens, which is there's something nefarious going on, right? Nemanim alehem omasim mechuarim. There are those who tell us they're doing bad things, that gives witness that the Chasidim are doing bad things, leading people astray. Korim hochem utumam. They are praying to that which is impure. Kol yimeim kechagim. All of their days are like festivals. They believe they get reward for not studying Torah. They yell out. It's funny, he doesn't mention the handstands. And then, it's fun. It doesn't seem like, right? To us, it really doesn't seem like that big a deal. I guess because 200 years later, we understand Chassidut as a certain approach to Judaism. If anything, because of Chabad and other things, it's become maybe the mainstream approach. But for them, right, it says our eyes are flowing with tears because of this, like a river. For this terrible pirtza, this terrible breaking through. That's it. It's funny. So is it just that it's a different thing? So in this letter, they don't mention the handstands. So maybe the handstands are just, they're indicative of the entire Hasidic program, right? Which at least in the eyes of the Misnagdim, the eyes of those who are against, mitnaged means against. It's interesting that everybody who's not a chassid gets defined as those who are against the Chasidim. That's what they're called. So I don't know. Or, is there a fear that, is there a power issue? Is there a fear that there isn't going to be the respect for those who are in power? So we were doing Vav, Zion, the last letter, and it was going through these things, these gezerot. This is of things that we have to make a decree in Leshenov to quash the Chasidim, that they're not allowed to have a minyan, and that they, if they want to use the small room next to the big base medrash, they can't do that. We have to be careful. Shalosh Shudis and all other meals, we have to divide and conquer them. And you can only have 2 of them at a time, except for a bris or another simcha, then you can have more, but don't sit them together. You have to sit them richuk makom. You have to sit them in different sides of the room. Who knows, what they'll do. They can't do, they are not allowed to do what they usually do according to their custom of standing on their heads, like the clowns do. So maybe that's right. Maybe it is just like, right, they're not allowed to dance. It's pretty wild. And that's for us. Like, we've adopted a Hasidic orientation toward the world. That's the truth, I think. We have, like singing and dancing scene is a good thing. We have, because we live, it's like Maimonides. Everybody today is a Maimonidean in the way that we see God. In a way, I think like everybody's a chassid today. So it's very hard for us to put ourselves in different shoes. They have to leave right after benching. God forbid we should not allow them to lift up their voices during davening too much, that they don't confuse us in prayer. Shachalila l'Rav Lev Malamid Tarnopol. So apparently there's a Malamed in Tarnopol named Leib. Mehayom Dilamata Leilech al Shum Seuda al Meshach Shana Tmima. He can't go to any communal meal for a year. Miyavar Zayamod Alav Hefsid Kimikodem. And if he does, we're gonna are they gonna dock him his pay, something like that, or they won't let him work? I don't know who this Rabbi Leib from Malamed of Tarnopol is, but he must be a chassid. Well, let him go to a meal. I mean, I assume they're not sending their kids to study with him. Maybe he's only teaching Chasidim. Shelo yelchu otan ha'anashim al shum nidava. That these Chasidim should not be allowed to Nidava means a gift. Maybe they can't give a donation. Rak melamdim sheyitzaveh harav of Bezdin. Interesting. So it sounds like the only malamdim, the only people allowed to teach children are those appointed by the Av Bezdin, the head of the Beit Din. You can't allow the Chasidim to volunteer to teach, and the person leading the davening in our shuls, God forbid, we should not call him a magid. He's only allowed to be called a shliach tzibur. Why? Because a magid, the magid of Mezrich, right? In other words, a magid, I guess the Hasidim called their rabbis, their prayer leaders, a magid. Now, a magid also refers to something spiritual. Magid refers usually to an angel that comes to a person to learn Torah with them. I don't know if the word magid is seen here as like saying that they had a special connection. And they have to lead davening like as usually done, and they have to listen to whatever the people say about how the davening should be done. So it sounds like there's a worry that they're going to end up leading the davening, and that we shouldn't, right? And there's also, it's interesting, it must have already been seeping in, because to say we don't want our chazan to be called a magid, well, why would they be doing that, right? So it means that already this language, their language is becoming adopted. All the leaders of the congregation of the community agree to this. Tzir for Rabbi Bezdin, and the head of the Beit Din of Leshanov agrees to this. Rabbi Menachem Mendel, son of the great Rabbi Yaakov. These are all the signatures of the rabbinic leaders, I guess, of the 10, or the lay leaders. So I think you see from this letter that it's really, that there's more fear here, but there's also fear that it's infiltrated. They're not just separate here. I don't know if we know what year this is. I think this was a little later. Let's see if he has a date for it. Right, because as time goes on, of course, the fears change, and they become more integrated. Number 7. Leshanov is near Broad. Let's get the date for it. Ach b'chol ofen אפשר לאחר משנס תק"ל בייס. So this was already published in Tavkuf Lamed Beis, which is 1772. This is an early letter. No problem. So this, at least according to Dubnov, the publisher of this is an early letter. 7. That's on the base. That's on it. So I guess even right at the beginning, right, there's fear because it's already kind of seeping in. Yeah, okay. So we'll look at some later letters we have letters also from the 1780s, 1790s. I mean, then it keeps going. I mean, it's not like it calms down. It's I mean, even when I was a kid, there was a lot of hatred of the Chasidim. So
Rabbi,
yeah.
If I could just interject a personal comment, as Eliezer knows, I grew up at a place called Green Road Synagogue in Cleveland.
Oh yeah.
And it was most of the men there were Holocaust survivors from an area called Marmarosh, which is Eastern Slovakia, Western Ukraine, Romania. And I grew up in a shul where we used Nusach Sfard. And I thought it was normal that when you got even though it was all Ashkenazi, when you got to the Kedusha, you said Keser.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't until I was an adult that I heard a different kedusha,
Right.
and no one in that shul, including my father, would have considered themselves Hasidim. In fact, I had no awareness of Hasidut
Yeah.
really, but it was just how they all learned how to daven as little boys, and so
Yeah.
I belatedly try to figure out the history of how that came to be. But it's interesting. There was
Yeah.
no identity of Hasidut, but that's what they used.
Right. That's true in a lot of shuls in America, a lot of old shuls in America, actually. My shul in St. Louis, it dates back to St. Louis in the 1880s, 1890s, and it's Nusach Sfard. It's always been Nusach Sfard. Why? I think by the time you get to the turn of the century, remember, Poland, for instance, is mostly Hasidim. Hasidim were, it spread. It was enormous. I think 1770, in 100 years, it spreads tremendously. Today, even more so. But yeah, I mean, it's a lots and lots of shuls in America. I mean, in fact, in a lot of towns, you have very old shuls that are called Nusach Sfard, for instance, or Anshe Sfard. In Memphis, there's a shul called Anshe Sfard. That's what it was. So I think those were, remember, just because you daven Nusach Sfard and you're, quote, a chassid doesn't mean you're going to stay a chassid in America or that you even were such a chassid. But yeah, you see that what began in 1772 as little groups, clearly in 100 years spreads enormously. So they were right to be worried. It's just that they're fearful of something that in the end doesn't turn out to be as, I think they're obviously worried early on. They're worried that this is going to be, some kind of alternative movement, something that's going to undermine observant Judaism. And there are yeshivas even in America today where they feel like it does, with the lack of stress on pure Talmud, that's a mistake and that's a problem. And they're still fighting a war from, 200 years ago. There is some of that. But, all in all, I mean, history proves, it has certainly proved that the Chasidim are a big part of Orthodox life. If anything, they're surviving better. But it's also interesting. What we don't see in here is the stress on is the criticism of the Rebbe. I would have thought that one of the big criticisms would have been, you have an intercessor, you have, a Rebbe, and there doesn't seem to be too much. There isn't I haven't seen criticism of the Baal Shem Tov or even Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi. Now it's true the Gaon refused to meet with Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi, but I haven't seen, it's a lot of the criticism is about attitude, and perhaps attitude's a much bigger issue than anything else. It shows that they have a different vision, and it's certainly scary. I think the Vilna Gaon is such a big personality and such a great scholar that it's hard to believe that, I think for him, there was something more going on. I think for him, he imagines, because he's such an expert in Kabbalah, I think he imagines that this really is something nefarious Kabbalistically. I think that Wolfson, again, doesn't write a lot about it. Wolfson seems to indicate it, that the Gaon I think the Gaon may have read more into this than there really was. About standing on your hands, that really is an inversion of the Sfirot and something. No, the Chasidim probably didn't, that's probably not their intention. It could be, though, that the Gaon, in a way, sees more in it because he's such a Kabbalist. We don't think of him that way, but he wrote more in Kabbalah than the revealed, even though it was not a Chassid. So, yeah. Okay, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.